Good evening and welcome to the Drive at 5 on IntellectualRadio.com/iHeartRadio station. I'm your host, Roman, and we have a great show planned for you today. But first, the forecast from our IntellectualRadio.com Weather Center. Today, partly cloudy, a little windy, high 46 degrees. Tonight, partly cloudy and breezy, low 30 degrees. Tomorrow, partly sunny, breezy, and a little chilly in the air, or a little chill out there. High 35 degrees. Tomorrow night, cloudy, low 31 degrees. Wednesday, partly sunny and a little chilly again. High 40 degrees. On Thursday, little sunshine and a little warmer. High 42 degrees. And on Friday, partly sunny and warm. High 47 degrees. The Drive at 5 is also part of the new Monday night lineup, starting with a new show called at 4 p.m. called 50 Shades of Business Growth. Policy Matters with Jerry Brown at 6 p.m. New Black Leadership at 7 p.m. Black Community Unity at 8 p.m. 9 p.m. Chronicles of Ron. And the Mic Up at 10 p.m. The Drive at 5 is also part of the fabulous 5 at 5 only on IntellectualRadio.com. Today, my guest is from the, actually, he's the candidate, for the 7th Congressional District. Election is tomorrow. Please give a Drive at 5 welcome to Anthony Clark. Welcome to the Drive, sir.
Thank you. I truly appreciate it being here.
No problem. Having me on. Thank you. Please give IntellectualRadio.com/iHeartRadio station your background.
Definitely. So my name is Anthony Vincent Clark. I'm 35 years old, originally from the Morgan Park community, south side of Chicago. At the age of 5, my parents worked extremely hard all of their lives, moved with my grandparents to the Oak Park community. They thought to themselves they wanted to provide me with a better educational and social opportunity. So they saw the Morgan Park community declining somewhat. Neither are college educated, but both worked extremely hard. My father was a proofreader at R.R. Donnelly & Sons and worked briefly for the Chicago Tribune. My mother, she worked as an administrative assistant at Proviso East High School for many years, and then transitioned from there to work as a payroll expert at CHP International in Oak Park, Illinois. My grandparents were both retired. They lived at Mills Park Tower, and they helped to raise me essentially and take care of me while my parents worked extremely hard. So yeah, at the age of 5, moved to Oak Park, went through the Oak Park school systems, was kicked out of the private school system in the 6th grade because I truly believed in, I didn't like bullies. I've never been a person who appreciated a bully. So I always found myself fighting to defend myself and others. And I actually was kicked out of St. Edmunds in the 6th grade for defending someone else who was being picked on. From there, I went into the public school systems, graduated from Oak Park and Forest High School in 2001. Briefly moved to Atlanta. I thought I was grown. I remember packing my bags, packing my car up, telling my parents I was leaving. I got everything figured out.
You're not coming back.
I'm not coming back. And in about a week, I was calling for phone cards and telling them I needed help. But I lasted in Atlanta probably about, I think, almost 9 months. And my father, being the great man that he is, he packed up his vehicle, drove to Atlanta overnight, told me to jump in the car and leave everything. You're coming home. Because one thing about my parents and grandparents, they always instilled in me not only hard work, but you don't take for granted the work that prior generations have put in. You know, you build upon that. You don't take it for granted. And my grandfather always told me, you know, service to others is the rent you pay for room here on this earth. You know, he got that from Ali. But I wasn't paying any rent for anybody. I wasn't even paying my real rent. And I wasn't building on any prior foundation. So on that ride home, you know, my father and I had a long talk, heart to heart, just about the sacrifices he made throughout his life to provide me with greater opportunity. And it just hit me, you know, that I've been wasting my time. I've been playing a lot of games with my life. And it was time for me to take some ownership and truly move forward and build on that foundation laid. So on that ride home, I decided to join the military. I knew my father had served in Vietnam. I have a half brother who had served, and my grandfather served in World War II on my mother's side. So I entered into the United States Air Force, served 6 years active duty. I was medically discharged due to a disability. I have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and what's known as Behçet's disease. It's an autoimmune deficiency, so it's in the family of like sarcoidosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's. Bernie Mac actually died from a similar condition. So yeah, was discharged in 2009. At that time, I was able to obtain my first 2 degrees. I have a communications degree, bachelor's in communications, and a master's in criminal justice. Those were my first 2 degrees at the time. And initially, I saw myself going into the criminal justice field because I wanted to give back. I wanted to pay rent. But due to my disability, I could no longer go into the DEA as I wanted to. Reevaluated, went through the Troops of Teachers program, became a special education teacher. Taught 2 years alternative school in the Austin community at Banner West Academy. Taught 1 year charter school in the Humble Park community at Mirtha Menendez Computer Science High School. From there, I went to Kenwood Academy High School in Hyde Park. And now this is my 5th year teaching at Oak Park and River Forest High School. Again, along the way, thinking about paying rent, giving back, tapping into the community, trying to make real change, just became frustrated. I've lost 11 students to gun violence. I was actually a victim of gun violence myself. Just seeing so many students struggle and families struggle, communities being underfunded and a lack of opportunity existing, and then equities that exist where you could literally cross a street and everything changes due to, property taxes, so on and so forth. But I started a nonprofit 2 years ago, Suburban Unity Alliance, with a primary focus on bridging the gap between equity and equality within our communities. So we've done a lot of work, hosted free financial literacy courses to teach the youth the importance of starting bank accounts and families the importance of investing. I think that's extremely important. We pay for scholarships, pay for groceries, pay for rent, car repairs, purchase churches, security systems that were being harassed by white supremacist organizations, help small businesses out. And from that, literally we've done everything. Most recently we were in the news because there were 2 young women. I call them warriors and survivors of sex trafficking. The organization that they were under, the funding was cut. So we put that out, and in 2 days we raised $11,500, found them placement. So things of that nature, help with the Welcoming Village ordinance in the community. From there, still didn't think I was doing enough. So I'm also the co-owner of Neighbors United LLC. I co-own that with a man by the name of Tim Smith. He runs the day-to-day operations where we employ at-risk youth and at-risk young adults because I truly believe, nothing stops a bullet, nothing stops negativity like opportunity. So again, from all of that work, wherever it may be, I was nominated to run for Congress. I received an email one day and it said multiple people in your community have nominated you to run. Initially, I was like, me, I don't consider myself a political type, work behind the scenes on policy, so on and so forth. But after praying about it, after speaking with my parents, my friends, I answered the call. I accepted that nomination, and here we are. So I've been running for Congress in the 7th Congressional District, and that's pretty much me.
So you said you received an email just out of the blue?
Yes, it was interesting. Actually, through my Suburban Unity Alliance email, because what happened, long story short, after the last presidential election, prior to 45 taking office, Bernie Sanders was a 100% grassroots candidate. But after he lost the primary, many of his former staffers, and actually some of Hillary Clinton's former staffers, saw the importance of grassroots efforts, being 100% grassroots, eliminating corporate money, not being influenced by money in the electoral process. So they formed 2 organizations known as Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats. And they essentially put out a call to communities across the nation stating that we want normal, ordinary people to run for office that are going to be 100% grassroots, that are boots to the ground, understand the importance of tapping into communities. And from that call, multiple individuals nominated me to these organizations. And I remember, I'll never forget the day I opened the email and it stated, multiple individuals in your community have nominated you to run for office. And, from that, the vetting process began. And I remember going to Knoxville, Tennessee, which was the headquarters for Brand New Congress, and they have like a women's suffrage memorial. And I came across a statue, and I'm a cheesy person sometimes, but the statue essentially stated that you build on the foundation prior generations have laid. And in that moment, it hit me. It was like, this is a calling. This is a way for me to not only pay rent as my grandfather has wanted me through or had wanted me, to do throughout my life before, he was called. But it's a way to rent to own, in a sense, to create ownership, to take it to the next level. Because to that point, I felt like I was doing work and there's so many other wonderful people doing work. But because of the systemic issues we face, we're not necessarily making the change needed to create ownership and opportunity. Essentially, we're just putting Band-Aids over open wounds. So yes, once I was nominated, again, prayed about it, talked to my parents about it, was vetted. They vetted me as well. I vetted them, accepted that nomination, and I've been boots to the ground since. And here we are, a day before the election.
What is your platform?
Yeah, so brand new Congress and Justice Democrats, again, I mentioned them. They're 100% progressive organizations, grassroots organizations. So primarily my platform, we're pushing for Medicare for all. We're pushing for women's rights. We believe in pro-choice. We're 100% pro-choice. We believe in LGBTQ rights, gay marriage rights. We're fighting for environmental rights like HR 3671 presented by Tulsi Gabbard, the all fossil fuels for clean and renewable energy. Believe in job creation. I think it's important to fight for an increase in minimum wage, but we have to take it a step further. We should tie minimum wage to inflation. Also looking into how automation is changing our workforce. I think we need to completely overhaul our educational systems because I'm still a teacher. I actually still teach full time while I'm running for office and still run my nonprofit, but we're failing our youth. We truly are. We're not preparing our youth for success. And that's an issue, so we need to bring in and I think expand vocational programs, technical programs. We need to entice and work with many of the organizations and businesses that are within our communities to tie them directly into our high schools. Some high schools like Kenwood are doing it. Oak Park is actually doing it with a nursing program. But I think we need to tie our youth directly into job opportunities after high school. Because if you take the 7th Congressional District, for example, we're at about an 83% high school graduation rate. We're only about at a 37% college graduation rate, college attendance rate. So that's a large percentage of individuals that aren't attending college. Now, yes, there are systemic issues that exist for students that should be in college that aren't. But college should not be the only narrative and definition of success. I think we have so many youth that maybe aren't meant for college, maybe don't want to go to college. So we need to connect them with job opportunities, I feel. So that's one thing that's important to us. We're looking into as well. I don't know if you heard it, but there's been a lot of talk in regards to universal basic income. I think that's something extremely important that we're starting to push for because, again, with the landscape changing, with automation occurring, with that gap continuing to widen between the haves and the have-nots, we have to truly look at how individuals are struggling in our communities. Another thing in our platform that's huge that actually separates myself from the incumbent is I believe the war on drugs is racist. I truly do. I'm pushing for the legalization of cannabis. I'm pushing for the expansion of medical cannabis dispensaries because I think disproportionately Black, Hispanic, and poor individuals are represented in our criminal justice systems and our penitentiaries because of drugs. We're not a proactive nation. We're reactive and we're punitive. We need to focus on restorative justice practices and we need to focus on proactive measures. So that's something I'm truly pushing for. Again, the legalization of cannabis, the end to the war on drugs, end to mandatory minimums, end to the cash bail system. Overall, we need to end privatization of our educational and prison systems. I think we need to end the practice of funding our high schools and our public school systems with property taxes because that's inequitable. So across the board, we could go on and on. But essentially, if you want to look at a label, we are extremely progressive and we just believe in being boots to the ground, working with grassroots organizations because nothing changes on a systemic level nationally until you start changing it on a systemic level locally. And I think you can see that with things I support and things I don't support. The NRA didn't start as a national behemoth. The Tea Party, which led to Trump, they didn't start as a national behemoth. They started at local state levels and then built. And I think that's what we're trying to do on our end. I think for far too long, the Democratic Party has struggled with, should we straddle the fence? Should we be neoliberals? Should we be moderates? Because, we don't want to upset anybody. And I'm truly a person that takes stances. I believe in what I believe in. To believe, fight for everyone through an intersectional movement. And if you agree, great. If you don't, I still love you. I'll still pray for you. But I have to move forward and truly fight for people. So my slogan is, putting people before politics and profit. And at the end of the day, that's what we're fighting for. So that's a rough overall summary of the platform.
Over the weekend, you and your opponent had a debate regarding gun control. You have mentioned that you are against teachers carrying weapons in school. However, in Southern Illinois, legislation has been passed for teachers to carry weapons inside the classroom. CPS teachers are worried about this trend. will come to Chicago and the 7th Congressional District. What are your thoughts on teachers carrying concealed weapons? And as Congressman, what laws or measures you would put in place to stop teachers from being armed in the 7th District?
Well, definitely. Again, our current president has mentioned this. He's actually pushing for it. I don't think it's a solution. I think it's reactive. But if you think about arming teachers, one, I'm 100% against the arming of teachers in the classroom. But as a military veteran, I'm trained in weaponry. Yeah, I held the M4. I've held an AR-15. I know how to use these weapons of war, these weapons of destruction. So I would be a viable candidate to be armed in the classroom. But as I stated at the debate, for a multitude of reasons, that cannot happen. Schools are safe havens. Schools are like, it takes a village to raise a child, and schools are part of that village. And our children should be able to enter a school and feel safe. If I'm armed or other teachers are armed, I guarantee you the majority of students will not feel safe in the classroom. It'll become even more like a prison, and tie into that school to prison pipeline. Because when we think of arming teachers, we have to think of a global perspective and think of everyone. Think of that diverse perspective of how will this impact all students. I have PTSD, for example, from the military. I was shot in 2007. Saw someone shot in front of me as well. A good friend of mine, Tyran Stockard. Thankfully, he's still here. Clearly, I'm still here. But I notice when I'm working with youth and I look into their eyes, like I'm looking into your eyes right now, I see the symptoms. I see full-blown PTSD in many of the youth in our environments because they're inundated with violence. They're directly impacted with violence on a daily basis, particularly in communities like Chicago. I think a local community activist, Jamal Green, he stated that it's not even PTSD. He stated that it's CTSD, continuous stress disorder. It's serious. So imagine how that will impact youth that are going through this, that are struggling, that are impacted, to see a teacher holstering a weapon. So I don't agree with it. As a black male, I don't agree with it because I don't even feel safe.
Do you think, sorry to interrupt,
no, please.
Do you think, because there's a big debate about automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons. Correct. Some people are saying, even people who are well versed in the Constitution, saying, okay, it doesn't say semi-automatic weapons. Why we just can't put a ban on semi-automatic weapons?
Right.
Why it's so much of a hard time to put a ban on semi-automatic weapons?
And that's a great question. Actually, it shouldn't be that hard. I'm sure you're aware, and others are. Between 1994 and 2004, we actually had a ban on military-style weapons. So essentially, semi-automatic weapons. These weapons of war, AR-15s, M4s. They could not be purchased. They could not be owned from 1994 to 2004.
But how did we get that? And I'm sorry to interrupt again. How did we get to that point?
Yes.
How did we get to that point? Because that goes to my next question. In 2016, Democrats had a sit-in protest. That includes your opponent. Due to the lack of gun control. However, Republicans shut them down. One Republican from Maine had a bipartisan bill that would ban a potential terrorist that bans them from even getting a gun. That has failed. As Congressman, how would you get your proposed gun legislation to pass if majority are NRA-sponsored Republicans?
Because I think it's important to recognize that the majority of the public, even on the Republican side, data polls have been taken. The majority of the public are now for common sense gun legislation. They're now for, again, making illegal the ownership of semi-automatic weapons, these weapons of war. It's the public that is going to take the public. Because yes, money in politics, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We have to get rid of money in politics. One, I truly believe that, because the NRA, the way they influence, politics, the way they influence incumbents and candidates to not make the best decisions for people. That's why we've gotten to the point where we are now, because of that dirty money. Because so many candidates and incumbents feel like I can't run a campaign or I can't maintain power without the money that the NRA is giving me or without the money that these corporations are giving me. But when you educate the public and you have the public going to their representatives and applying that pressure, I think that's what makes change. Again, this is a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. But if we move to, again, fully funding the CDC. We have to get rid of the acts, these rider acts that were put into place that prevents us from being able to fund the CDC and look at gun violence as a public health issue. So again, we need to do that because with research, we're going to be better able to inform the public and educate the public and continue to shift the narrative. I'm working directly with the youth on the March for Our Lives next weekend. March 24th is taking place on a Saturday. I hope everybody can attend. And our youth leadership, adults have failed our youth. The youth are taking over and they're continuing to apply pressure because I think that's an issue as well. And I'm sorry, I know I'm talking long, but it's such a nuanced issue. Think about when the Vegas shooting occurred, when the mass shooting occurred in Las Vegas. Politicians on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, were at least finding commonalities in regards to eliminating the bump stock loophole. We're going to get rid of bump stocks. Even the NRA initially came out stating that we're open to conversations in regards to eliminating bump stocks that will take a semi-automatic weapon and turn it into a fully automatic weapon. But because of the fickle nature of society, they were banking on us moving on. They were banking on the news cycle shifting our focus.
But that wasn't the news cycle that was necessarily the NRA was hoping that.
Yeah,
if you look at the dynamics, because if you look at what happened in the Vegas shooting, what happened, let's go beyond that.
Sure.
Let's say the streets of Chicago.
Yes.
The semi-automatic. There's a documentary on Netflix. A guy, almost a bazooka style semi-automatic weapon. He only pays like $200 for it. Says he gets it off of Union Pacific. The guns that comes into Chicago, we have one of the toughest in the nation.
But 60% come from out of state. Yes.
How can you, as a congressman, prevent that?
Right.
Because if you look at the Vegas style shooting,
right,
you can't even come to a common ground on a clip.
Right.
Then you have to go, which goes to my next question. Since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that U.S. citizens can conceal and carry weapons throughout, including some public establishments, it has been a spike in shootings across America and easy access for semi-automatic weapons.
Correct.
In Illinois, which has a majority of Democrats, Governor Runner refused to sign a measure for a gun control bill that was approved by both Republicans and Democrats. As congressman, would you set some type of legislation to repeal conceal and carry? Why or why not? If you want to let it stay, or you want to repeal conceal and carry?
Right. So great question. A lot of components to it. So again, in regards to the 60% of weapons that are coming in outside of Illinois, you mentioned Union Pacific. Long story short, I remember being a youth and my father telling me in the Morgan Park community how trainloads of weapons used to come into his community and it would just be a field day. And I really honestly didn't believe him. But, these multiple articles that have been written in regards to still to this day, with all the security that exists, with all the technology we have, somehow our train yards are still underprotected. And we're bringing in loads and loads of weapons that our communities have access to. That's an extremely huge issue. But in regards to legislation, we have to close these loopholes. That's why we need to push for universal background checks, because at these gun shows,
but
these private sellers,
and I'm sorry to interrupt,
yes,
they have been pushing that.
Right.
The problem is when you have a majority of Republicans.
But what's pushing? What's your definition of pushing? Because pushing for me is after the Vegas shooting and after everyone was quiet in regards to eliminating bump stocks, pushing for me, if I was currently in that seat, I would have been at the top of my young lungs yelling like, hello, we cannot forget about this legislation.
They did a sit-in. They did the I don't think. But you have majority in Springfield. You think they could do more? What is the more component? That's what I'm trying to get at.
But again,
if they approve, if the Supreme Court approve conceal and carry,
right?
But and you have a majority of Democrats that when you go and say what's up, and they're saying
the issue is we're focused primarily just on legislation. Legislation is extremely important. But again, It's not enough to have your Democratic side believe in something. It's not enough. And I told you, we said it. I think we both said it. Now the majority, in a sense, are against assault weapons. They want an assault weapons ban. They're voting. They're pushing for that. They're polling and showing a large percentage of individuals within our nation are for an assault weapons ban. It's not enough for us in regards to concealed carry, in regards to, because at a state level, laws are different. We need a federal level universal background check law.
But the Supreme Court,
But
see,
again,
you go to the highest court of the land, and if they say,
public, we need to convince the public. You need to identify commonalities on both sides. I think that's what's important. And that's why you push for things in your local community. It's not enough just to push for legislation or present legislation. I mean, perfect example, and I'll explain this to you. The incumbent, he just presented a bill. I think Chris Kennedy was standing next to him, where they stated that, they wanted to push for overall tax, increased tax on any weapons purchase, any ammunition purchase. I was sitting down talking with Republicans. You can actually look on my page. A Republican actually gave up his AR-15 to my camp. It was the weirdest, craziest thing I ever saw in my life, but we actually filmed this because he believed in the messaging, because he believed in how we push for you're complicit in certain aspects if you don't act. He gave up his AR-15 to us and said, destroy this. And we destroyed his weapon, and he shifted. It's the messaging. Legislation is only one component. You have to truly tap in, be boots to the ground, and talk to people. Identify those commonalities in the intersectional movement and build from there.
But what are the current commonalities?
Human life. Human life. The health of one community directly impacts the health of other communities. A perfect example, I'm in Oak Park. Throughout my history of being in Oak Park played a direct role in essentially building up a metaphorical wall between Austin. I remember being a youth in Oak Park taking down basketball rims because they didn't want Austin residents coming in and playing. I remember being a youth in Oak Park stopping different late night events for youth or families because they didn't want individuals from Austin community or other communities coming in. You have to build bridges between communities and work together, because again, we can't just focus on legislation. We have to also focus on opportunity creation while we're fighting to push back legislation, eliminate legislation, or amend legislation. We have to create jobs. We have to give our youth something to look forward to, because yes, there's individuals that are going to have guns. The Second Amendment is clear. While we're fighting to change legislation, we need to fight for opportunity creation, so our youth are not in these streets shooting and killing each other. We need to look at how the interconnected issues, the war on drugs, helps lead to an increase in gun violence, the lack of job opportunities, the underfunding of schools, the closing of mental health facilities. This all plays a role. So while we're trying to convince, while we're building bridges, we have to say, look in a community like Oak Park, where I remember when I first started teaching in Austin, I made $16,000 a year. I taught freshmen through senior students in the same classroom with 3 books and 2 computers. It was basically like a prison. I go to Oak Park River Forest 9 years later. I'm making 6 figures. Every student has a computer. Every student has anything and everything they want. That's inequitable. Look how there's no grocery stores in Austin. Corner stores. There are food deserts that exist. So where are Austin residents most likely taking their money to shop? In communities like Oak Park. So their money's not even staying in their communities. So this is connected to gun violence. We're not going to overnight eliminate guns. It's not going to happen. We're not going to overnight eliminate the 60% of guns that come from out of state. But what we can begin to do while we're pushing for legislation is also push for investment in our communities and opportunity creation. Legalize cannabis and end the war on drugs, and try to use that money to invest, things of that nature, urban agriculture, co-ops. There's so many different things we could do while pushing for legislation to, I think, stem the gun violence. Connecticut, for example, some legislation that I'm interested in specifically, Connecticut moved to essentially treat guns like a car. You need not only training, but you need a license and you need insurance. And if you look, I challenge people to look. I believe gun violence dropped by 40% when they moved to this. That's something I'm interested in on a legislative slide, while also fighting for opportunity. I think we need to treat guns like we treat our vehicles. It should be harder for us to get a car, a driver's license, than it is to get a weapon. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. So that's something that I'm looking forward to, pushing for and working on. Public health, treating it as a public health issue, things of that nature. There's so many different interconnected issues at hand. But while we're pushing again for legislation, we also have to fight with the same passion, same energy for opportunity creation, because nothing stops a bullet like opportunity. And I truly believe that.
You mentioned cannabis, and Oak Park is one of the distribution sites as well.
Correct.
And I looked this up.
Mm-hmm.
In 2010,
Mm-hmm.
Black farmers was trying to get into the cannabis realm, and they were denied by the government, the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
African Americans are being incarcerated because of cannabis.
Yes, they are.
As the 7th congressional, if you win tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
what will be your first? Let's say you push for the legalization.
Mm-hmm.
You have thousands upon thousands of people in jail, and that includes possibly major lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
How would you fix that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's not an easy process. But if you look at areas like San Francisco, for example, they actually just passed retroactive legislation, which are releasing individuals that were incarcerated because of cannabis. So it's not enough just to say legalize, because again, as you stated, and this is actually, I just saw an article recently where Black growers and other Black individuals looking to get into the cannabis market are still struggling because now banks do not necessarily want to, work with them and provide them with loans or invest.
How would you curb that?
So again, yes. So you have to fight for retroactive legislation for the legalization of cannabis. But also, when you do that, again, retroactive, so addressing the individuals that are disproportionately incarcerated due to a plant, you also have to look at how do we invest in our businesses. So again, the interconnected issues, funding is available to not only support small business opportunities, but entrepreneurs. We have funding available for that, whether it's an appropriation authorization or entitlement bill that you're pushing for. You can have funding to support small business opportunities, to support entrepreneurship, to support co-ops and communities. So I think identify funding, identify training that will specifically target these urban environments, because we're the ones who are disproportionately been targeted by cannabis being illegal. So when it becomes legal, I think it will be a travesty if we don't benefit and profit from it. So not only do we have to retroactively push for legalization, but we also have to push funding into training measures to help and support small business owners and entrepreneurs that are looking to get into the business. Because if you look at Colorado, I mean, they just passed $1 billion due to the legalization of cannabis. It's going to bring in so much money. And with that money that we can tax, I'm talking about like 36% tax rate. You can invest that into the urban environments, invest that into communities, and use that money to create business owners, to create opportunities for the communities that have been underserved.
LaShawn Ford, almost a decade ago, we would have been the first state to legalize marijuana. He got shut down not once, but twice. He will tell you he was on the show several years ago talking about it and discussing it. You look at it, you fast forward now,
right,
and you look at the opportunities.
Right.
You have majority of Democrats down there. What is the issue of why we're behind in the 7th congressional district? You're the congressman. Put your congressman hat on.
Right.
Something is wrong down there.
Right.
Something. I mean, it's not like laws or things have not been pushed.
Right.
What we're talking about.
Right.
But why they're not getting passed.
Yeah, and again, I think you look at shifts in a sense. I mean, I have to be honest, the incumbent, for example, in the 7th Congress, he does not believe in the legalization of cannabis. So it's not only Republicans, and we actually have some Republicans that believe in the legalization that are pushing for it. But if you look at shifts, I think one thing that's, to be quite honest, that's helping the move in the legalization of cannabis is the opioid epidemic. When it was the crack epidemic, and the original war on drugs, because it was directly impacting Black, Hispanic, and poor populations, the majority of the nation didn't necessarily have as much concern. But with the opioid epidemic now taking hold and impacting white middle class and upper middle class families, it's a huge issue. Don't get me wrong. And I care about all people that we need to help and support. But now you have the nation shifting in a sense from the war on drugs, which was punitive and reactive to, oh, no, we need a more proactive approach to drugs. We need a more proactive approach to how we respond to the drug epidemic that exists. So I think that's helping the shift. I mean, Senator Harmon out of Oak Park just introduced a bill. I mean, it's temporary, but for those, again, addicted to opioids, he introduced legislation that will provide them with a temporary medical cannabis card in order to stem their addiction to opioids and get them off of their addiction. So it's little stuff like that, those trailers that begin to move and shift. So I thank, LaShawn Ford for having that vision and having the foresight, but everything's in due time in a sense. And unfortunately, we don't even have all the Democrats, truly agreeing. There were some gubernatorial candidates on the Democratic side that didn't agree with the legalization of cannabis, honestly. But I think we're shifting the narrative and we're shifting the focus. And we have more individuals now, not only Black people or Hispanic people or poor people that are looking at, we need to legalize. So I think that's going to help us when we're pushing this legislation on a state and a federal level.
Because of timing's sake, we have to move on here. But you mentioned opioid. Donald Trump is introducing legislation calling for the death penalty for drug dealers, including drug dealers for opioids. The death penalty will highly favor African Americans, and some of the death penalty cases have been overturned because of DNA and police planting drugs on African Americans. As Congressman, how would you assure the African American community what Trump is proposing would be a fair process if passed?
Right.
Or would you put some type of legislation in place to avoid that potential problem?
Yeah, first,
if so, what are your measures or legislation?
Right, correct. I mean, it's a great question. Again, I would have to literally dig into the actual proposal. I know Trump has been discussing it in order to identify ways to stem or stop that legislation from happening. But I think first and foremost, your first line of defense, again, is educating and utilizing the public to push against their representatives. And I think it's important to push out that data, that if you look at data, if you actually study it, the majority of drug dealers are not Black. But often the narrative exists, where they look at somebody thinks of a drug dealer and they think Nino Brown and not Walter White from the show. What was it? Breaking Bad. But I think if you understand who this is going to impact, even though disproportionately we're represented in our prison systems and in our, criminal justice system, the majority of drug dealers in our communities and drug users are not Black, are not Hispanic, are not minority. So again, what Trump is trying to push out.
If you catch one big Smokey the Bear that's African American, they're going to charge him with the death penalty.
No question, because of, again, the inequities that exist in our criminal justice system. I mean, that's across the board. So first line of defense, I cannot create or propose legislation right now because I don't have whatever his proposal is in front of me. I don't think he's introduced anything yet. He's talking about it and discussing it. But the first line of defense is educating the community and telling the community that no, this is reactive. This is punitive. I think throughout history with the war on drugs, I think throughout history with the privatization of our prison systems, we're learning now. I mean, anybody can look at the 13th, the documentary on Netflix. It's New Age slavery, being punitive, not focusing on restorative justice practices, not focusing on rehabilitation. Our recidivism rates are still extremely high. Punitive does not work. Being reactive legislation does not work. That's not going to stem anything. So I think first line of defense, again, is being a true fighter, standing firm and being extremely vocal. It's easy for someone to be loud in a room where everyone else is loud, but we need leadership that's loud in a room when everyone else is quiet and saying, no, this is not acceptable. This is racist. This is not going to fly, and getting people to push back. I think that's the first line of defense. And then, of course, if it ever passed, which I don't think it would, I would identify and investigate and research and study what type of legislation could be proposed to ensure that this is rolled back, repealed, or it doesn't impact our Black and minority communities disproportionately.
According to MSNBC, Good Morning America, and the Chicago Tribune recently, and other news outlet, Donald Trump secretly put into effect a severe cut and SNAP program, which gives food boxes to the less fortunate. Some people in Illinois were blindsided by the cuts and already have started receiving boxes of food instead of them receiving their monthly benefits. Therefore, Food pantries are showing an increase since February and cannot keep up with the demands if it continues. Oak Park, and I did a study research on that, has an increase in homeless population, and food pantry population has increased as well. As Congressman, what measures or legislation would you put in place to stop the Trump's food box program and people and have people receive their full benefits? Because what's happening now, they're saying you're going to have peanut butter, you're going to have bologna, you're going to have that cheese.
Right. Yeah, first and foremost, I think one thing that I preach to the communities is oftentimes throughout history, I feel we recognize the issue, but then we wait on someone else to address it. It's extremely important that we empower ourselves as communities and not wait on anybody else to do the work that we could do for ourselves. So first, on the ground level, because of, even if you don't even think about SNAP, because of the food deserts that exist in the first place, I think we need to have a push for urban agriculture, a push for co-ops. Oak Park, I don't know if you're aware, has like the sugar beet. We have multiple co-ops that exist that create ownership within our communities. We need to focus on urban agriculture and teach our youth and teach our families. We need to grow our own products first and foremost. We don't need to, or we shouldn't have to be beholden to this government that oftentimes is racist, oftentimes does not care about us, and are going to cut funding. I mean, I think he's even trying to cut before and after school programs. They're putting that in
Which leads me to my other question.
Right. So I'm going to finish this one. So we not only need to focus on urban agriculture, the education and support of co-opting, so we don't have to wait for a business to come in and bring in a grocery store. We create our own grocery stores. There needs to be funding in place to support those efforts. But this also ties back into the look into, again, a universal basic income. Because if you look at like HUD, for example, HUD 3, SNAP benefits, so on and so forth, because they have the majority, they're directly targeting social services that benefit poor communities. They're directly targeting, taking that money from them and putting it back into the military. Because for them, somehow they have this sick notion, and I'm a military veteran, that the bigger and better your military is, the more money you spend on your military, the more patriotic you are. I truly believe the more patriotic you are is taking care of those that are sick, those that are ill, those that need support. So not only, again, urban agriculture, support co-ops, but I don't think they're going to have the majority. We need to put in efforts to take away the majority from them in the House and Senate, so on and so forth, and then push for, again, looking at how we're investing.
Sorry, why this is not being like it's blips in the news, and it's not being vocalized. If someone is blindsided, they're thinking they're going to receive their benefits. They're going to go shopping. Let's say they're going to go to Jewel's. No notification in the mail. They're going to say, come down and get your box of food.
Because again, who's impacting? I think you've been in this a long time. You've done a lot of work. You help your community and so on and so forth. I think we recognize when it's a black face on a screen, or when it's certain communities that are impacted, the majority of the public or even our government are not necessarily going to care. That's why it's extremely important that we, again, have vocal leadership in office that focuses on this. I mean, perfect example, and I know we got to move forward. Think about Joe Barrios. Hopefully, you're not voting for Barrios, for Cook County assessor. No, I'm saying you in general, like the public, not you, but you in public. But you mean to tell me this is the first time local politicians or politicians on a national level knew that our property tax assessments were inequitable? No, someone exposed it, and now all of a sudden, oh my goodness. I mean, Mike Madigan directly benefits from our property tax system being inequitable, and he's a Democrat. This is not the first time we knew about this. But again, we need leadership that does not put politics before people, does not wait, I'm going to maintain status quo, I'm not going to rock the boat. We need individuals willing to rock the boat, willing to fight, and willing to step out, as you stated earlier. Why are we just finding out about this? We need to educate our communities. Somebody should have been warning and informing our communities like, hey, recognize what Trump is trying to do in his administration.
But they thought it was a joke.
This is how it's going to
impact you. I'm just being real with you. Yeah. They thought it was a joke. They wanted entertainment. That's
Trump not playing.
But now they know. Getting back to the let's go to education. According to the NPR, Donald Trump is cutting after-school programs that will nearly affect 2 million children may lose their after-school care. Your thoughts on what would you propose to prevent those cuts in other or an alternative after school program for the
Right.
district.
Yeah, I mean, again, at the federal spending bill level, we need to look where our money is allocated. And across the board, I'm going to make this clear. As communities, even if it may benefit your family or someone as an individual, we need to be 100% against privatization of our educational systems, privatization of our prison systems. Because what happens again is that's taking money away from our public school systems. Our schools in many of our
So
communities.
are you against charter?
I'm 100% against charter. I work for a charter for 1 year.
And why you're against charter?
Because again, one, charters have no unions. I know that CTU is trying to unionize. They're pushing for that now.
They already
right,
passed
they're past that
secretly.
So, but again, what happens is if you have one good charter school, I'm not going to sit up here and say I know Ron Carter Academy or whatever that is. Many people, push him, but for every one good charter school, you have 40 to 50 bad ones. Okay, that are underserving our communities, the selective enrollment. So of course, sometimes their numbers are going to be higher, but oftentimes their numbers aren't even higher because they have many of these teachers coming from, they lack experience. They lack experience working in our urban settings, serving urban communities. So charter schools, again, they're not serving our communities. They're truly not. And by pushing for a charter school, you're directly taking away funding on a federal and state level from our public school systems, which are already underfunded through the property tax system that exists. Working for a charter, I saw firsthand where administrators, there was high levels of nepotism. They will hire relatives on the spot with no experience. I saw administrators walk into a room directly, fire a teacher in the middle of the day with no recourse. He had zero protection. So across the board. And again, look at Rahm Emanuel, who's a huge issue for me for multiple reasons. They're not even only pushing for privatization of our schools, but they're privatizing our services, food services. Aramark is a huge issue. Research them. Schools are pushing against them. Students are pushing against them. They're the lowest bidder oftentimes, but they're serving moldy and raw foods. Janitorial services, as mold growing in our schools. Oftentimes, schools are the only places where our students feel safe or eat. So one, we have to look at a federal spending. We have to, take money away from our military industrial complex that exists, put money into our school systems. I think we need to truly investigate the property tax system. We need to move to a progressive property tax system across the board. But look how property taxes are funding our schools, which is inequitable, and we need to truly fight. We have schools closing across the board in Chicago.
But can I interrupt you there?
Yes, of course.
Because you're saying funding. If you look at the chemical makeup, recently Oak Park said they are looking for more minority teachers.
No, Oak Park didn't say that. Community members on the ground, grassroots, after I was almost fired from Oak Park for fighting against racism.
Why?
Because it was a blackface incident that I called out, stood firm against, fought against it, and the community stepped up, signed petitions, marched, and, I was, taken back into the school. But after that, there's multiple grassroots organizations that see a need, for minority teacher hires.
But why all of a sudden you have this so-called lack of African-American teachers? It's not like African-American teachers do not have the credentials to become a teacher or a substitute teacher.
Right.
Why they stop hiring them? Is it CPS? But it goes beyond CPS because you're in Oak Park Village there.
Right.
And then you're looking at Maywood, Bellwood. You're looking at all of this. As a congressman, if you're elected tomorrow, how can you assure the 7th congressional district they will have equal hiring for minorities, especially African Americans?
Right. Again, at a local and federal level, there's interconnected issues. First and foremost, so as a teacher, we have to pass what's known as the basic skills test. Again, I'm just using I statements. Many of our standardized tests are racist to begin with. I truly believe that. If you think of critical race theory, you don't have to be racist to work within a racist system. But they've changed our basic skills test now to the point where, again, many of our, black and minority teachers or, teachers to be, they're struggling to pass this test. So we're not even having teachers that are being qualified now. That's even being impacted. But this is not a new issue in Oak Park. This has been an issue in Oak Park. Even when I went to Oak Park and graduated in 2001, there's a lack of minority teachers. Even in CPS in a lot of schools.
Why? But they claim diversity in Oak Park.
Yes, Oak Park often claims diversity and pats themselves on the back. But again, if you truly look at it, even though we're integrated as a community, and again, there's a lot of grassroots organizations that are fighting, for this and recognize this, we're segregated as a community. The majority of our blacks and our, minority populations live like on the outskirts. They're not receiving the support. Because think about it, as much money as I make as a teacher at Oak Park River Forest High School, we still have an achievement gap. Where white students are performing at disproportionate levels, that's disproportionately higher than our black student population.
Why is that? And people are probably doing the undercover way in the Austin community to go to Oak Park River Forest High School. Why is that? Is it because white teachers are separating the education levels?
I think it goes back to what I call generational capital gaps, in a sense. And again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but you have a lot of white parents in the community. Again, we have a lot of people that care, but the white parents in the community that don't necessarily care outside of their own student. So they're fighting for and taking all of the resources and all of the benefits for themselves. They're pushing their children into honors and AP classes. And then I've heard parents state, and again, I got to be real, I don't want my child in that class. And that's code. What do you mean that class? That class with a lot of black kids, a lot of Hispanic kids, so on and so forth. So school systems in general, they're going to lean to and benefit the individuals that they feel have the most influence. So that's why it's important to work outside of the school system and push for change. So in regards to minority hirings, I think every school needs a diversity coordinator. Every school needs a diversity coordinator that goes beyond just simply putting a job opportunity on a website. You need to have outreach. Too often I feel institutions feel, oh, they're going to come to us. But we need to have diversity coordinators within.
Can I stop you? Yeah. Okay. You said outreach, which is keyword, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to
keep stuff.
Then I'm going to let you continue.
Yes.
Chicago Police Department. Big diversity program there. No African Americans are being hired.
Yes, I saw that article. Or article.
Right. And they're saying because of the mental state, they cannot pass the mental test.
Right.
They will actually figuring out why they pass the written test. They can do it, the physical, so forth and so on. But then again, it's kind of like the mental.
And I mean, I think that's hilarious, because if we could think about the white cops that we see on TV beating the hell out of community members, shooting unarmed community members, they somehow passed the mental test. So again, think about who influences and runs our systems. The systems that we operate in are racist. They cannot say that they didn't have black cops.
But as congressman, how can you?
Because I think you have
to. How can you shift the dynamics? How can you curb this problem? Because it's a systemic problem.
Yes, it is.
Because they did an all-ditch effort a couple of years ago, and the 1,000 cops that's supposed to graduate, all of them were white. Majority of them, let me rephrase that, majority of them were white, few Hispanics, one black.
Yeah, I think, again, what happens oftentimes is, even on a political level, that we leave it up to the system. Like, we work with the system and say, okay, the system understands, the system's going to take care of it. We need mandates. Quotas aren't the overall end all be all, but I think we need mandated quotas for police departments, even businesses, in regards to local hiring practices within our communities. Because one thing is clear, I'm 100% against the cop academy. I'm no cop academy all day. Right now, it's a us versus them mentality in regards to how many of our police, there's some great police officers out there, but overall the system's the issue, how they enter into our communities and don't view our communities as viable, don't respect the individuals that live in the communities. So we have to have mandated quotas, not only in police forces, but in our businesses, large businesses that come into communities. Because think about it, even large businesses, individuals drive in out an hour, 2 hours to work there, and you're not hiring anybody from the local community. So at a congressional level, I would look at a federally and at a local level, how to work with local politicians to, again, implement and identify how we can honestly force like force and mandate that our police departments have specific quotas for local hiring, local training to make sure we're meeting certain numbers. And if you're not meeting certain numbers, then that means funding, because oftentimes money talks. Funding is going to impact, your department.
That sound means a wrap, a hard wrap there. But before we go, I'm going to be fair. Please, before we go, how they can get in contact with you, state briefly, because we only got seconds to go. Your punch number.
Yes, punch number 23. Putting people before politics and profit. You can look me up on Facebook, Anthony B. Clark. Website is www.anthonyclark2018.com. Think it's time for a change. We need fighters in office taking a stand. Love everybody. Peace. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Truly enjoy it.
Thanks to Earl Winfrey, our executive producer. Wonder who's behind the scenes. See you next week. Guess what? We'll have a surprise next week.